All right, so let me go through Smith now, and he kind of occupies this unique position. He's known as the father of economics, which is one heck of a title, but in one of the few cases is actually deserved. Um, you're going to see in the reading, he straightens out some basic misconceptions that have gotten us to the ideas of what a market is and what supply and demand are. Let me go through the first part of the reading, about through paragraph 12 or so, and clarify these. And I think you're going to see that, boy, things start to make sense once you get rid of these misunderstandings. And there he is right there. That's a picture of him. He's, he's the champion of men with big noses, so he's always been a hero of mine. Um, and he's writing this, and he published Wealth of Nations as a book in 1776. And he was a moral philosopher. There was no such thing as an economist at that time. It wasn't a field of study. He created this field, and he was a moral philosopher, wrote about economics, and it's became a field after that. And let me go through some of his ideas, some of the things. And you can get this reading, make sure you have it open. And I've got some ideas here. In paragraph 1, he sets out some ideas, and I need to make you aware that he basically uses a kind of understatement, and most people don't get it. Let me get myself over here. He says that wealth consists in money and silver it should be in money, gold, and or silver, is a popular notion which naturally arises from the double function of money as an instrument of commerce and as a measure of value. That has a lot of stuff in it, that one little sentence. It's a popular notion that wealth consists in money, and it's totally false. Yes, folks, wealth does not consist in money. And he set it out early on, back in 1776, and people still don't get it. If you're going to understand economics, you must understand that wealth is not equated with money. If that's the case, we are the poorest nation to have ever existed on the face of the earth, because we're massively in debt. What Smith does is shift the focus away from money and says wealth is really about productivity. He's going to get into how wealth is on productivity. It's not about the bottom line. It's about how much you can produce of something that other people want. And that's what the United States actually does. And I'm going to come back to this. That wealth is in your productive capacity, in your ability to produce things that people want and value, and they'll give you something for it. Money is instead going to be a two-part tool. It's going to be a measure of value and an instrument of commerce. So if you go to the store and you want to buy something, you don't bring a herd of cows to buy your groceries. And you can show up to the grocery store and say, I want to give you a cow and take away these bags of groceries. And they could say, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the cow. We'll bring it to the back. They don't do that. Don't ask me how I know, but they don't go for that. They will take money, but they could take cows if they wanted to. They take money because money is an instrument of commerce that they can use, put in the bank, and then at the end of the month turn around and pay their employees. They can't take the cow to the bank and then turn around and chop it up and give it to the employees. Here, you get a rump roast and you get a ribeye. No, that it doesn't work. Okay. Instead, money is an efficient way to turn around, a grocery bill for $53 you can pay, and then they can turn around and make, a monthly paycheck out of it for this, and they can pay the electric bills. It's an instrument of commerce. Okay. But it's also a measure of value. We can talk about all these groceries are worth this many cows or that much or something like, we could do that. Okay. Or we could say that car, if somebody asks you how much that car is worth, they're probably going to tell you in dollar amounts. It's worth $9,500. They could tell you it's worth 7 cows. That doesn't help much unless you really know what the cow is worth. It becomes the common language. What $9,400 is, what you can trade it for. You don't necessarily know about cows or anything else, but we know we can use it as a measure to estimate the worth. In the same way, if you ask somebody how tall they are, they're probably going to tell you I'm 5 feet 9 inches, and that's how tall. They could have said I'm, 2 meters or something like that. They could have told you that. So it becomes the common measure that people use to talk about value, but it's also the instrument that we can use for trade. Okay, that's the value, and that confusion happens because it's used for those two things. So that wealth consists in money is a popular notion, but it's erroneous. It is wrong. Okay, so and let's go to the next one, where it seems like this is a simple idea, but it's a very important one, and this is where Smith is crossing over two different areas of, and this is one of the reasons why he's so great, because he crosses these two different areas, and his approach to economics does. He says a rich country in the same manner as a rich man. What he just did is macroeconomics, microeconomics. The economics that control how individuals and how individual companies and how households and things like that, that's microeconomics. Okay, and what regulates what countries do and how they work with each other on large scale, that's macroeconomics. In his basic ideas for wealth and for markets apply at both the micro level and the macro level. Very few things in economics work that well. Okay, so a rich country in the same manner as a rich man is supposed to be a country abounding in money. And to heap up gold and silver in any country is supposed to be the readiest way to enrich it. Okay, I'll use this analogy. If you have somebody, let's say you have a carpenter, and he's been working for a long time, and he's ready to retire. He's 65, and he's got, let's say, $40,000 in the bank. Okay, he's got to be somebody who's got money, abounding in money. Let's say he's got 40,000. If you compare him, and he's 64, let's say 65, whatever, and he's retiring. If you compare him to a young woman who just graduated from medical school and she's got $10,000 in debt on credit cards, who's richer really? Who's got more wealth? Well, most people can see that the woman would be wealthier because she's got a medical degree that she is going to be able to use over the course of the next 20, 30 years to earn money and bring money in and buy other commodities. That's how you would assess her wealth. It's not just by the credit card debt that she's $10,000 in debt. You would go, that doesn't matter. And you would look at him and go, he does not look at he's going to have potential productive years ahead of him, pulling in money or pulling in anything, pulling in resources. Most people would see that she is really wealthier because she's got a skill that she can exchange down the road for greater wealth. And that's what he's saying. And in a lot of ways you have to understand, does that country have productive capacity in order to generate wealth down the line? That's the thing that Smith was pointing out, that just looking at the bottom line, in other words, he's got $40,000 in the bank and she's got $10,000 in debt, you're missing a lot. Okay, in the same way you're missing the nature of wealth within a nation if you are just paying attention to the bottom line. One of the things that somebody like Smith could point out is that the United States is actually a very wealthy nation because it's so productive. But he's not saying that debt doesn't matter. Debt does matter. Okay, but it's only one factor among many factors. So it does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It does matter, but it's one factor, and it can, in fact, be a lot less important than people think. Okay. Then he has paragraph 3. He says, Mr. Locke, this was John Locke, who is considered to be one of the great philosophers ever. And Smith here is not one of the well-known philosophers of his day, and Locke is. Smith is jumping into the ring with one of the heavyweights, and he's never even been to the gym before. And he's right. He lands a punch on Locke, and he nails him. Okay? And he's right. Economics since Smith have proven that he is far more reliable than Locke. Locke remarks a distinction between money and other movable goods. All other movable goods, he said, are so consumable in nature that the wealth which consists in them cannot be much depended on, and a nation which abounds in them 1 year may without expectation, but merely its own waste and extravagance, extravagance be in great want of them the next. Money, on the contrary, is a steady friend, which though it may travel about hand to hand, yet it may keep from going out of the country, is not very liable to be wasted or consumed. Locke is wrong. Many people confuse this paragraph because Smith is pointing out that this is a common notion, not just when he points out popular notions. This is what most people believe, but well-read people believe that Locke was right. But Smith is pointing out that these folks are wrong. Gold and silver, therefore, according to him, and again, he's going to point out that this is wrong. According to him, the most solid and substantial part of the movable wealth of a nation. That's not true. It's the productive capacity. So disallowing people from moving money out of the country is a policy that is erroneous. It makes sense to people, but it's wrong, okay? And so I want to point out that time has proven or has demonstrated that, shown that Smith is right about this. It's the productive capacity of the country, okay? It's not about how much wealth you keep in the nation or how much gold and silver you keep your paws on. And then he points out through the next few paragraphs that Spain followed this policy of going around and grabbing, as much gold as it could throughout, gold and silver. It set up shop in Mexico to exploit the silver mines. They got all this silver and gold together, and guess what they found out? That they had too much of it and it lost value just because they had too much of it. They didn't increase their productive capacity, and they in the end found out they had a lot of gold and nobody wanted it. So they weren't wealthier, okay? Then he goes through, they represented secondly, and I wanted to point out this is paragraph 8, they represented secondly that the prohibition, these are the laws that are enacted in the legislature, this would be our Congress or Senate and our House, could not hinder the exportation of gold and silver, which on the account of its smallness and their bulk, the prohibition to their values could easily be smuggled abroad. You've got to watch it with certain kinds of laws. And if you know, in the U.S., we've got laws against drugs. So therefore, we don't have any drugs in the U.S., right? We have no... Of course we do. Come on. Wake up. The laws against drug sales and all that kind of stuff, that's what he's kind of talking about. What you do when you pass laws against something is what you create is a black market. This is no longer something that's going to take place in storefronts. In other words, I'm not going to tell you, hey, I'm going to sail overseas to India and I'm going to take all this gold with me, okay? Because back in Smith's day, they used to prohibit, you can't travel overseas with gold because we need to hold on to it. Okay, well, people still did. They just said, oh, I'm going to go visit my aunt over in India, okay? And then you come back 4 months later and you got a bunch of tea. Well, what'd you do? You had stashed in the bottom of the boat all this gold, but you didn't tell anybody. You created a black market by prohibiting it, okay? By prohibiting drugs in the United States, what we did was we created black markets. The trade still took place. It still took place, duh. But you actually made it illicit. You made it go underground. That's what you do often with commodities, is you push the trade that goes on with it underground by prohibiting it. And if you prohibit the exportation of what you think is the wealth of the nation, you will create a black market out of that. Okay? So be aware of that. Now, so one of the things that Smith is pointing out is that you can't stop it in the first place. And in the second place, you have a wrong idea about it in the second place. You don't even know what it is. The wealth of the nation is not gold and silver. And if you prohibit it, you're just going to create a black market. So cut it out. Smith was right about it, and things have shown since he is. Okay, these arguments were partly solid and partly sophistical, and he goes through these arguments that were made by the merchants to the legislatures of England back in 1776. When he says solid and sophistical, he's saying they were part good, but they were part silly. They were just fluff, okay? And these were the arguments of the merchants trying to get the legislature to cut it out, okay? So they had arguments, they had decent ideas. So, and some of these notions that people had about economics were partly solid and partly sophistical. So I just want you to catch that, and it's a nuance of Smith's rhetoric that he's walking through these arguments and he's dismissing some and taking some others up. And let's get to the real backbone of Smith, which is starting in 11 and really at 12, where he nails it, okay? He nails it, and that's going to set up when we get to Marx. In 11, he points this out. This is about free trade. Let me go up here. It says, a country that has no mines of its own must undoubtedly draw its gold and silver from foreign countries in the same manner as one that has no vineyards of its own must draw its wines. If you want wine, and if you live in Scotland, like Smith did at this time, Scotland doesn't produce its own wine. If you've got Scottish wine somewhere in your cellar, I feel sorry for you. How do you, if you're living in Scotland, what do you produce? And if you want wine, make some whiskey or some beer, and then export that stuff. And then that's how you're going to get the money to buy those Italian wines or those French wines. That's how you get French wine or Italian wine in Scotland. You make beer and whiskey because they know how to do it. You don't produce beer and whiskey really in Italy, like maybe in France, but you better not. You're not going to make the best stuff. The Scottish and the British and the Irish, they know how to make this, the whiskey and the beer. Okay, what you do if you want it and you're living in somewhere in Italy, you're living somewhere in Sicily, and you really want some whiskey. What do? Make some wine and export it. Okay, this is extremely important to understand. Prohibiting the exportation of wines to make sure you have wine, that's a bad idea. Produce what you're good at producing. Okay, if you want stuff that you're not good at producing, produce what you're good at producing, and you'll get it. You will export what you're good at, and you will import what you're not good at. Okay, that is free trade, guys. That's how it works. So produce what you're good at and don't produce what you're not good at. And that, look at this little Apple iPhone. And this shows you, this demonstrates, this is and we can say it was produced in Silicon Valley up in California, but physically it was manufactured in China. But in Apple's offices up, and they've got extensive offices up in Silicon Valley, where all the designers and all the engineers and all these people, make their money and do their job. They do that in Silicon Valley, and they actually allow China to produce it and manufacture the physical reality of it. But the designing, the marketing, and everything, I mean the design of how it looks with that little Apple logo on it, that's part of what was produced. The manufacturing of the physical phone took place in China because China is better at producing it efficiently than we are here, because we would charge so much more to produce it here. Okay, that's what Smith is talking about. Smith, of course, could see the Apple iPhone coming. Okay, he was way ahead of himself. And let me get to the last point and wrap it up. This is paragraph 12. This right here is the notion of supply and demand. Smith nailed it back in 1776. He nailed supply and demand, and nobody else nailed it. He did it, and people still misunderstand this one sentence. Revolutionized this, I guess it's two sentences. It revolutionized the world. And if you look at charts on gross domestic product throughout the history of the world, you will notice in the late 1700s, gross domestic product started to increase. It was middling along at this pathetic little level for millennia, not just centuries, not just decades. It was millennia. And then starting in 1776, as the world started to understand supply and demand, it takes off. That's why Smith is such a magnificently important writer to understand. And please understand again, like I said at the beginning, He wrote this book and then he went back to writing moral philosophy because that's where the money was. So the quantity of every commodity which human industry can either purchase or produce naturally regulates itself in every country. Naturally regulates itself. In other words, the amount of production that takes place is going to naturally take place without a centralized authority stepping in and saying, you know what, we only need 2 taco stands on this corner. We are not going to allow any more taco stands. No. Let the guys who know how to make tacos figure it out for themselves. No central authority. Okay? According to the effectual demand. The way you find out how much demand there is by letting people figure it out. Let the markets work it out. Effectual demand is what's up here in your head. How much do people want taco trucks? Well, how much can you produce? And we'll figure it out. Okay? That supply and demand work together against each other and they figure out in the middle a value. How much are you willing to pay for it? That value is what are you willing to give up for that taco? Or how much are you willing to pay? What are you willing to give me? And that's what money is. That's that instrument of commerce. That's what you're going to hand off. Okay? And if you want, that kind of food, you're willing to give that much for it. Okay? For those who are willing to pay the whole rent, labor, and profits. So it is a trade-off. In other words, what you're willing to give me for it. That is supply and demand. And then he does this in the second half. Okay? And I'm telling you, folks didn't get it. But no commodities. Those are the things that are produced that go to market. It can be any kind of item. It can be items like burritos or cars, but it can also be any kind of service. If you're going to hire somebody to mow your lawn, that's a service that you're going to pay for. The same way you're going to pay for a burrito at Taco Bell. Okay? That's a commodity. A service is a commodity. Doctors don't make anything. They provide a service that you want to buy. That's the commodity. The ability to conduct brain surgery is a commodity. Okay, you're going to pay for it the same way you pay for a burrito. Okay, that's a commodity. No commodity regulates themselves more easily and more exactly according to this effectual demand than gold and silver. Money is a commodity that you give up certain things. So in a weird way, Taco Bell buys your money with burritos. You buy their burritos with your money. The brain surgeon buys your money with the service. You buy the service with your money. That is freedom of trade, and it naturally regulates itself. Things that are wanted are going to be more likely to pull in more money, and that way more people will produce those things. That causes economic activity and makes the country become more productive. That's what makes individuals and nations wealthy. You find out, what do people really want? Do they want somebody to mow their lawn or perform brain surgery? What should I do? Mow lawns or become a neurologist? That demand, according to what people will pay for, will tell you what you want to do. So it's for services and for items, cars, burritos, mowing the lawn, brain surgery, everything falls into this class. But always remember, all of those commodities, those buy that other commodity of money. Money is another commodity, and it's trade. It's part of trade. That money just makes trade circulate faster and improves productivity. It makes it easier to evaluate how much that car is worth. It's worth not 400 cows, but worth $9,400. And it makes it easier for us to talk and to trade and to be productive and to focus on what we produce most, whether it be, moral philosophy or burritos or brain surgery. It makes us be the most productive we can, because California produces the design and the marketing of this phone. And we're pretty dang good at it. What we don't do very well is produce the physical reality. China does that better or more effectively. Okay, that's what Smith put together and put out in his theory. And I'm going to shut up right there. I'll let you finish the rest of the reading, but I hope that puts the basic notions of Smith clear to you. And what we're going to do with the next one is pick up how his ideas were inherited by Marx. Many people have the misconception that Marx is against Smith and that they should not ride together in the elevator. But actually, Marx understands what I just pointed out to you. He got it. And I'll walk through Marx and you'll see that you must understand Smith to understand Marx. And you're going to see that Marx is going to lay the foundation for what's going to be Keynes. Okay? Take care, guys. I'll see you at the next video. Bye now.